I've had a lot of people write me and tell me over the past few years about how much pressure they felt from their real estate agent, sometimes their lender, sometimes their friends and family to jump in and buy a house. And they really felt that FOMO, the fear of missing out, because it just seemed like if they didn't do it at the moment, that they would never be able to do it. That's how so many people felt. That was part of the reason that the housing market got so insane and completely out of control over the past few years. Well, here's a story about a guy who did this in Atlanta. He actually went under contract to buy a house in 48 hours, okay? The FOMO was so big for him that he decided within 48 hours he had to buy this house, okay? Back in the spring of 2022, pretty much peak FOMO, and sadly for him, close to peak housing prices as well. But guess what? Fast forward to today, he is now struggling to sell this house. He's only owned the house for 3 years, and now he's already selling, which is already kind of going against the kind of the rules when it comes to buying a house. You can buy a house and eventually sell it for a profit if you hang on to it long enough. But 3 years is hardly ever enough time, even under normal conditions with a normal market, which right now is anything but. So now this guy has changed his mind and he wants to go back to being a renter and be free of the costs and headaches that have come with his 1,600 square foot property. But the problem, his house has been on the market for about a year now, and he hasn't gotten a single offer on his 3-bedroom house that he paid $399,000 for. Now this guy's 31 years old, keep in mind, okay? He bought this house 3 years ago, and here's a quote from him. He says, "Homeownership isn't what it's cracked up to be." And now, after the house has been on the market for about a year, after 2 price cuts, his home was originally listed at $430,000, so he thought maybe he was going to break even after all the selling costs. Now he's down to $387,500 and still no offers, still no sale. Sometimes I also see people ask me like, "Hey, Michael, like, who cares about these properties that are 1, 2, or $3 million? What about the average person who's looking at 200 to 400K? Well, that's what's happening with these people. Like, you see, the thing is, it doesn't matter which price category you bought in a couple of years ago. It's just that the higher the amount that you paid, then the bigger the losses. Still people who bought within this price range are having problems, as you can see. Oh, free apples. We got to come back and get some of those. By the way, today I'm walking in Mill Valley, California. Still got a little bit of fog today, but the sun's trying to come out, and it's not really like raining or misting. So here's what happened with this guy. Around that time in 2022, a lot of his friends were buying. Sound familiar? He felt the pressure, right? And he liked the idea of having a place to himself after sharing an apartment with a roommate. And I was warning people back then, guys, that nobody should really be buying at these prices. But the problem is the FOMO was so high because people kept seeing the prices climb, right? And everybody had this perception that it's just going to be like this forever, especially since inflation was a huge problem, an even bigger problem than it is right now. And everybody said, there's no way that home prices could come down with this level of inflation and this level of cash injection that we saw into the economy. And I can see how people might have drawn that conclusion, but this is not the first time this has happened. We've actually had the privilege of seeing something like this happen before, and we see how it ends. And this is how it goes. But now, fast forward 3 years later, everybody that had FOMO and rushed in to buy is now having massive buyer's remorse and wishing that they never did it. Homes in Atlanta, just like everywhere else, are just sitting on the market. People don't have the money to buy these $400,000 houses anymore. It was different for him. He paid $400,000 for the house back then. They don't say what his interest rate was, but I'd be willing to bet it was probably in the threes. Buying that same $400,000 house now at 6.2% or whatever it is that just came down to because of this crash of the treasury yields is still a much higher number, a much higher monthly payment, combined with much higher property taxes, much higher insurance, and all the other costs associated with homeownership. And now a lot of people who bought these houses are stuck in these houses that they wish they never bought for one reason or another. Sometimes it's the commute. Sometimes it's the house doesn't really suit their lifestyle. Sometimes it's not their ideal location. Whatever the reason might be, because they didn't really think it through and have enough time to really consider if this was the right option for them, now they're struggling. But here's what happened to this guy and why he's selling. From the very beginning, he says that he was spending more on the house than he expected. Lawn care costs added up, and there were more rooms to furnish, even though he realized he only used about 40% of the house. So you don't have to furnish it if you're not using it. You know, you don't have to feel the pressure to spend furniture on a room if you're not using it. Just keep it empty. But, you know, people really get pressured into these social norms and feel like they have to do things a certain way just because everybody else does it, right? So now this house cost him $29.50 a month, basically $3,000 a month to maintain the house, which includes his mortgage, homeowner's insurance, utilities, and lawn care. And by comparison, before he was only paying $1,200 per month in rent. Think about that, guys. His payment has more than doubled because he thought it was a good idea to become a homeowner during the peak of the housing market. And I'm glad that these stories are coming out now and people are willing to come forward with their story and say, hey, look, you know, I thought it was a good idea at the time and now I'm realizing it wasn't. Here's what I'm doing to rectify the situation. And it's also a precaution of how you can avoid this from happening to you. We got some old cool cars here. And now to make matters even worse, 2 years after he bought the house, he started smelling sewage. And because he wasn't home a lot and he travels frequently for work, he only found out now that there was a pipe that wasn't connected to the sewer, man. That's just disgusting. Like, that means like, oh, what, every time he's flushing the toilet, it's just hanging out underneath the house and in the neighborhood? That's pretty bad. It cost him more than $13,000 to fix it and make the necessary repairs. So now he's looking at selling his house and getting out of this place as soon as he can, and he's going to go back to renting and living with a roommate. And also, he's going to be selling at a pretty significant loss because remember, he bought for $399. He's at $387.5 now. It's been a year. Clearly, the price is way too high, and he bought at peak pandemic prices. So my guess is he's probably going to be selling, you know, probably in the $330 range, most likely, if he's lucky. You know, that's just a wild guess off the top of my head of what a buyer today might be willing to pay for a house like that. But I don't know the Atlanta market that well, and it could be much less. So he's already mentally prepared that he's going to be taking a loss on this property. He just doesn't know by how much yet. But looking back, he wishes that he didn't move so quickly. Okay, that's like one of the biggest lessons here. I don't care what's going on in the market. I don't care if it's hot or cold. You need to take your time and make sure you're making the right choice because you only get one shot, guys. Once you're the owner, you're stuck, okay? You know, there's no turning back once you're at the closing table and you sign all the final paperwork. You're locked in. Now you're gonna have to live with any mistakes you may have made. But the thing is, all these mistakes could be prevented if people would just have a level head on their shoulders and not let the FOMO get to them. Like, yeah, sure, when the market's hot, you may miss out on several properties that you wish you would have bought because they seemed like a good buy for you and you were just too slow and you couldn't make it happen. Oh well. But eventually something comes along that is either going to be good enough or something that you really want. But basically how this story ends is he says, next time I'll take my time before I buy. He doesn't really seem that upset about it, to be honest, which I guess is a good thing because that means he's a mature guy that realizes that he made a financial mistake and he's going to just do better next time. And that's really all that any of us can do. And he's one of the lucky ones too, because this decision isn't going to wreck his finances. At least he didn't mention anything about it in this story, because that's what happens to so many people. Because a lot of people who bought during this same time frame had to really overextend themselves to get into the house. Don't forget that. But now things are so slow in real estate that home builder layoffs are now on the rise, particularly in Florida and Texas, because so many of these homes are going unsold, even though a brand new house now is at a lower price than an existing home, which you never really see happen. According to John Burns Research and Consulting, they found out that 63% of U.S. home builders said that their local peers had recently conducted layoffs, while only 14% reported no layoffs among peers. And the numbers were even more striking in all the key Sunbelt markets. 87% of Texas home builders, 79% of Florida home builders said that their peers had recently cut workers. And by contrast, which is not really a big surprise, is that the Midwest and the Northeast regions of the country had the lowest level of layoff activities for home builders because these are areas that are still in very high demand. But even on a national level, as you can see from this chart here, still 63% of home builders reported layoffs among their peers. That's a lot, guys. That means more than half of the home building industry right now is laying people off in order to get by. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, construction employment has fallen by 3,800 jobs from March of 2025, while residential specialty trade contractor employment is down 44,000 jobs from its September 2024 peak. So just like all the other jobs that are being lost in this country, construction is on the list. And you know what's funny is there was all this talk about how all the deportations and everything like that was going to cause massive labor shortages and force the price of brand new homes to skyrocket, right? Because of all of the illegal labor that's going to be going away due to the deportations, right? But in fact, the opposite is happening, where there's still an oversupply of construction workers right now, so much so that they have to get rid of people during the same time frame. That's why I personally am staying away from predictions anymore, because there have been so many things happen over the past few years that you really just cannot predict. And even though a lot of the predictions I made were correct, you know, I did predict that home prices were going to come down about 3 years ago. Me and a few other smart friends that I know here on YouTube. But everybody was saying it wasn't going to happen. But now that it finally has happened, you know, I'm happy I was right. At the same time, things haven't really materialized the way any of us really thought that it would. It's taken longer than anybody thought that it would. And guess what? Historically, residential construction employment tends to roll over before most traditional recessions. So this could be a leading indicator of the broader labor market, and it's something that we need to keep an eye on right now. And we know for a fact that basically every other industry is shedding jobs right now. Unless you are in retail or you are in hospitality or healthcare, there's a good chance that your industry is losing jobs. And we got a little bit of that mist coming in again. Now, another thing we got to talk about is the mortgage rates have been coming down actually pretty dramatically due to the 10-year treasury yield taking a big nosedive earlier this week, okay? The 30-year mortgage rate, as of me reporting this, is at about 6.28%, and prior to now, it was at 6.53% just last week. So that's a pretty big drop in just a week. But once again, is this enough to get anybody to go out there and buy a house? I don't think so. I know it wouldn't be pushing me over the edge, even if I was looking. Because honestly, I don't really care about the rate. I don't care if rates are 13%. I'll pay it if the price of the house is good. You know what I mean? And I think more and more home buyers today are finally catching up and realizing that, yeah, that is the smart way to go. I need to be more concerned about how much I'm paying for the house rather than the interest rate. But remember, there's a good chance that once the Fed starts cutting rates this month, if they decide to do it, that mortgage rates may actually go back up because these drops in treasury yields could be temporary. We saw the same thing happen last year. We saw all of the yields go down and mortgage rates go down before the anticipated rate cuts began. But after they actually did it, then the opposite started happening and all the treasury yields started going back up along with the mortgage rates. And so many people have been refinancing, guys, and this is probably going to cause even more people to refinance. But the problem is a lot of the refinances that are happening right now are cash out refinances where people are taking money out of their houses, okay? Already loan officers are saying they're getting more calls from people who are interested in refinancing now. And the thing that you got to remember is that according to a recent ICE report that I think I covered last week already, but according to them, the cash out refinances right now are at a 3-year high between April and June of this year. And a cash out refinance is when a homeowner takes out a loan for more than they owe on their mortgage and then they pocket the difference. So why would anybody do that? Well, typically they do it because they need the money for something or another, whether it's for living expenses, which I'm guessing that's the reason most people are doing it right now, or it could be because they just want to blow the money or buy a new car or remodel the kitchen. People do it for all kinds of reasons. But the average cash out refinance in the second quarter resulted in the average homeowner pulling out $94,000 in home equity, increasing their monthly payment by $590, guys. So you hear these stories about mortgage rates going down, how good news this is for the lending industry and the housing market at large. But when you really read between the lines, you realize that this is actually a bad thing because of the reason behind why people do it. And this is what the majority of folks are doing, because 60% of all home loan refinances in the second quarter were cash out refinances. So more than half of the people were doing it to pull the equity out of the house, not to get a better interest rate, not to lower their payment, but to pull equity out of the house. That is certainly not a sign of recovery in either the economy or the housing market. Quite the opposite, actually. And one other thing I want to cover here is, because I am in California right now, I always think about the homeless situation, even though I don't really have to see it or deal with it. Where I stay over here in Tiburon, it's like non-existent, guys. You really don't see homeless anywhere here. But in Florida, there has been a huge spike in the amount of homeless people over the past 3 years. In fact, it has gone up 28%. And I wanted to bring this up because California gets picked on a lot for their homeless situation, which rightfully so, because they literally spend billions of dollars a year here. And every year the number of homeless people keeps climbing, because all of the money that's supposed to be going towards putting people into homes actually gets squandered and stolen through inflated bids and contracts and things like that. But besides that, Florida is in danger of falling down the same slippery slope as California because of how expensive it has gotten to live there, with incomes not keeping up with that expense, okay? Family homelessness in Florida has risen 28% in the past 3 years. Individual homeless rates rose 14% in the same period. Right now, it's estimated that there's about 30,000 homeless individuals in Florida and about 42,000 families who are doubled up in hotels, motels, or other temporary housing or living situations. Now, Florida rents have surged by 39% between 2019 and 2023, which have risen nearly $500 a month, from about $1,230 a month to $1,700 a month. And also, Florida saw a huge boom in population, about 1 million new households since 2019, which I've made a bunch of videos on. You guys can go in the history of my channel and see stuff like that. But the problem is, about 904,000 renter households earn less than 60% of the median income, and they pay more than 40% of their income on housing. So this is one of the key reasons why so many people are going homeless in Florida. Now, between 2019 and 2023, we did add 240,000 multifamily units in Florida, but the problem is most of the new construction is not targeted at these very low income individuals. I've shown you guys all the things that they build where I live. Everything's insane. Whether it's a rental community, whether it's a place that they're trying to build for sale, it doesn't matter. The prices are out of control. So the reason I wanted to bring this up is not only because I live in Florida and this is a huge problem in the state that I live in, but also I'm kind of curious to see how Florida is going to handle this problem and how it's going to be so different in California, because California and Florida seem to be the polar opposites in so many different ways. Like they're literally on the opposite ends of the country. The weather is the opposite, as you can see where I'm at right now. And the political climate is certainly the opposite as well. And the way they handle all of their problems couldn't be more opposite either. So it's very interesting for me, when I come here for a few months every year and I spend some time here, to just observe and see how different everything is here compared to in Florida, and how things work and how they don't work. So I really am curious to see how Florida is going to handle this rising problem, because having 24,000 homeless people is a lot. We're climbing towards the top of the list of the states that have the most homeless people. Obviously, California still takes the cake, but it's also a much larger state, and they have a lot of programs that kind of cater to the homeless. So it's going to be interesting to see if Florida is going to go down that same route and cater to the homeless. I don't think that they will. I mean, even in Miami Beach, where I live, they have essentially made being homeless illegal. You're not allowed to camp out on the streets or the beach or anything like that. You do that, they'll offer you housing and services. If you don't take it, you go to jail. That's how it works there. And I know that might sound kind of harsh, but that's how it needs to be. But anyways, I just found out about this today. So it will be interesting to see how Florida decides to handle this problem in the near future. So don't rush into things, guys. If you have a real estate agent or a family member telling you the best time to buy a house was yesterday, the second best time is right now, I would run the other way, okay? In the long picture, okay, over a 30-year time frame, that can be true. But as you can see, most people don't hang on to their homes for 30 years anymore. That used to be the way things were. People did do that in the past. People had a job, the same job for 30 or 40 years. They lived in the same house for 30 or 40 years, but no one really does that anymore. So you have to adapt for modern times, and modern times are volatile. Prices are coming down in most places. You can really be rewarded by having some patience right now. And don't forget, if you need a real estate agent, I can always help you with that. I can set you up with a buyer's agent or a seller's agent, no matter where you live in the country. All you gotta do is click on my link down in the description below, and I have those free services available for anyone who wants to use them, and they help the channel. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.